How's it going, everyone? So I wanted to give like a really informal talk or discussion about the most important aspect of software engineering. And it's one of these things that I don't see many tutorials online even talk about or mention. It's kind of like an afterthought. And the scary thing is that a lot of companies and products out there actually don't do this. So I think it's really important to kind of spread awareness and make sure people understand the benefits of doing this in your software development. But before I dive into this topic, be sure to press that subscribe button and the bell icon if you're new to this channel, if you want to get notified when I publish other videos, because I think they should help you become a better web developer and a software engineer in general. Also, a friendly reminder to press that like button because it helps my channel grow and it helps my videos get published in the YouTube algorithm. So let's just dive into what the topic is. So basically, the topic I'm kind of talking about that I haven't actually said yet is testing. All right, and you might be like, oh, okay, I'm going to click off this video now because he's talking about testing. But in all honesty, most tutorials that you watch out there don't actually talk about testing, right? There's a whole another side of software engineering involving like unit testing, integration testing, smoke testing, performance testing, acceptance testing. Like there's so many different forms of testing that you can do on your product. And I think it's kind of a shame that not many people in, these React tutorials or JavaScript tutorials even dive into the topic. So when you're working with like React, I mean, you have like React testing library and you have Enzyme. And the reason you have these testing libraries and frameworks are to make sure that when you make a change to your code, you can verify that that change didn't break some functionality. Okay, it seems super simple, and it really is a simple concept, right? You write tests that cover your code to make sure that when you change stuff, or when your other teammates change stuff. Remember, you're working on a team with other people. So if you have a team of 10 developers, there's a high chance that someone's going to change a piece of code that's going to break a completely separate part of the system. And you won't really know about it unless you have a good, thorough, unit testing with good code coverage. And more importantly, some integration testing to make sure that, hey, when the UI talks to this service, everything works as it's supposed to. So again, if you're kind of new to React or learning how to code, I definitely recommend that you just start learning about testing along the way, because testing actually helps you learn how to code better. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm like a test-driven development advocate, but I've been doing it recently, and it actually helps you be able to implement logic and make sure that that logic actually meets the business criteria. So what typically happens when you're doing software development is you have like a product owner or someone who understands the business asking for features to be implemented, right? So how do you as a software engineer make sure you implement those features correctly? Well, you typically have to verify it with testing. Now, you could do manual testing. Some companies hire and outsource other people to go through the UIs and click things. And, they have like a spreadsheet or a matrix of like, when you click on this button, you should do this, and then you should be redirected to this page, and then the user should get like a logout button. But honestly, I'm talking more about automated testing. So when you get those business requirements, you want to write your tests, and it really helps if you start with the tests using test-driven development and kind of outline what the code should do. So for an example, if you're making like a command line interface that should tell you if you need to wear a jacket, you probably want to write a test first that says, hey, if I call this command line program with an argument of 60 degrees Fahrenheit, I should expect that the program prints out, yes, wear a jacket. So you can write those tests up front, and then as a beginner, if you're kind of learning how to code, you can just keep on implementing some logic, run the tests, and see if your tests pass or not, right? So that's the whole cycle of write a test, make sure it fails, implement it, turn the test green, and then come back and refactor if you need to. Now, the main reason I'm bringing up this whole topic of testing right now is because recently in this NFT Magic project I've been working on, I was trying to kind of implement some logic and get it deployed. And I found myself in this feedback cycle where I actually have to make a change in the code, deploy it to Amazon, and then test it on Amazon, right? It's a terrible way to do testing. All that should be able to be ran locally. But at some point, I'm like, okay, enough is enough. I need to actually write some unit tests to cover my code. So I kind of just stopped deploying my changes every time I made a change. And instead, I just focused on writing unit tests so that, if I'm running a function called generate NFTs, I verify that it downloads a file from S3. I verify that it actually unzips the file correctly. I verify that it uploads every individual file back to the S3 bucket. I verify that it cleans up the temp directory, so I don't want stuff laying around after the code runs. And then finally, I verify that it sends back a URL to the user, right? So that's one function that's doing a lot of stuff. And using a test-driven approach with unit tests actually helps me develop the code and implement the logic without having to deploy to Amazon and check manually every single time, because it really adds up the amount of time that you spend clicking on the UI over and over and over again, when you could probably verify these things with a unit test, integration test, or an end-to-end test. So at this point, you might ask yourself, well, I'm a beginner, man. I don't really understand like testing. I don't even understand how to code. Honestly, I would recommend that if you're trying to learn how to code in like JavaScript, or like if you just want to focus in on the back end like Node, I also recommend that you go and learn about like Jest or Mocha, and also how to write these tests and use the test runner to verify your backend code. Just start with unit tests or integration tests. There's tons of resources out there that kind of walk you through how you can do this. In fact, I could probably do more video tutorials in the future about testing, since I think it's such an important topic that no one really talks about. Even if you're like following along tutorials online, like come back through and try to write unit tests. Even if you're testing a simple function, right? If it's a simple function that's supposed to change or capitalize all the people's names in an array, like write a test that verifies that, right? You need to send in an array that has a bunch of lowercase names, and then in your test, you assert or you expect that the arrays of strings are all proper case afterwards, right? So that's really simple example, but you can imagine how complex code can get and how important it is to make sure that you test all the different paths in your code. I think another thing that's really funny is that there's actually a lot of projects out there, like legit software companies and products that don't have testing, right? So they actually have UIs that are being deployed and new features are being added, and they have little to no testing covering those features. And I kind of wonder to myself, like, how are they even functioning as a company? Because if you've ever like worked on your own project, even if it's like a little side project, like I know you've done this, where basically you make a small little code change and you're like, oh, this will be fine. You save it and you go ahead and load up the application, everything's broken, right? So if you imagine, you know, now you have like tens or hundreds of lines of code, and it's very easy to break tons of functionality for the entire application. How do you actually verify that you're not breaking stuff? And the answer is just, you know, testing. Just make sure you understand how to do testing. And I want to finish with saying, like, if you're in the job market, or if you're trying to get into the job market, I would definitely recommend asking the places you're interviewing, like, what is your code coverage? What percentage of code do you cover with tests? What type of tests do you do at your company? Do you do integration tests? Do you do smoke tests? Do you do end-to-end testing, something like that? Make sure you ask these critical questions, because I would recommend, if you're trying to get into the industry, you don't want to get pulled into a company that has no testing, because then you're going to be basically spending all your time debugging issues and trying to fight fires instead of actually implementing new features that help people out. And secondly, if you're trying to get a job as a software engineer and you're kind of like, you don't have much experience, if you go into an interview, you can actually talk fluently about, you know, the importance of testing and how you can use it to kind of write better code or higher quality of software, then I think that puts you at a step above a majority of other people who haven't even bothered learning about this topic, especially since most tutorials on YouTube, like, no one talks about testing. It's like this taboo thing that no one wants to do, but honestly, it's like the most important thing that you can do when you build software. So you might not think it's that important with your little like to-do list application, but imagine you get hired to a company that needs to build pacemakers for patients, right? You got to make sure that stuff's tested. You don't want that pacemaker to just stop working for some reason because you decide that you want to divide by 0 at some interval, right? Like, you don't want people to actually get harmed or die due to your lack of quality control in your test process. So, I mean, I think it's really important. It kind of depends on the software that you're building and the company that you're at. But in my opinion, all software should be tested pretty well, because you don't want to either harm the users or hinder their ability to do what they need to do. Like, another good example, let's say you're building software for planes, right? You want to make sure that the plane doesn't just crash randomly, right? I know they have a lot of manual things in place to make sure that the pilots can actually steer the plane with manual intervention, but there's also a lot of software that's involved with keeping a plane flying with like autopilot and stuff. And we want to make sure that the tests that are the code that's written actually does what it needs to do. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this topic. I've been kind of ranting on a bit about it. So just be sure to remember to test your code. It's as simple as that. Make sure you write tests of your code, unless you want to just, you know, be a sloppy coder or a cowboy coder, but that's all up to you. Do what you want to do. So if you enjoyed watching this video or enjoyed listening to me rant, be sure to give me a thumbs up. Also, if you're new to this channel, be sure to press that subscribe button and bell icon for more content like this in the future that should hopefully help you become a better web developer or software engineer. And like always, be sure to leave a comment below. Do you enjoy testing? Do you actually have high code coverage on the projects you're on? If you're a beginner, do you actually spend time learning how to unit test your code, or you kind of like save that for another day? Interested in hearing your thoughts? Happy coding. Have a good day.